Welcome to another episode of the GunBlog VarietyCast with your hosts, Sean Sorrentino and Aaron Paulette.
Welcome to episode 175 of GunBlog VarietyCast Radio, a proud member of the Self-Defense Radio Network. How are you doing, Aaron?
I am doing well. It looks like I'm actually going to get through Christmas with my sanity intact, which is no small feat. Christmas is usually a very high-stress time of year for me, but this year I've managed to accomplish the near impossible, and so far I've been just chilling out for the most part. It helped that I was able to buy my Christmas presents early for a bunch of people, and I mailed them out. Then I did my Christmas cards, and so just for the past few weeks, I've just been, okay, I can coast, which is really cool. So much so that last week, I actually attended a Christmas party, which is not really my thing, but I was invited by a good friend of mine, member of my pony posse, and he invited me up to a Christmas party held by his maker lab. He's really into, welding and 3D printing and things like that, and so he bought a membership.
Does he also make glasses with GunBlog VarietyCast logos on them?
Yes, that's right. I'd forgotten about that. Yeah, when we had the GBVC NRA house and he personalized them, he used the laser to personalize the glasses and make the designs, and I don't really know how it works, but lasers were involved, and that's cool.
My wife has one, and she really likes her. She still uses it.
Yay! So I went to that, and I had a fair amount of angst about it because, I still got the very visible scar. I have some Dermablend, which is really good for hiding the red scar lines, but I'm still real puffy. And I was worried about that because I didn't want people just looking at the injury on my face. What I ended up doing was I bought a veil. Now, this took me a while to find the right one because the veils that you can normally find on the internet seem to come in one of two flavors. Either they're so very transparent that they might as well not be there, they're only there for a fashion statement, or there's some sort of belly dance Middle Eastern thing, very gaudy, and I didn't want that either. I wanted something that would actually hide the puffiness. I just happened to find one online on Etsy, and it was a hand-tatted chain lace veil, and I'll attach a picture in the show notes. Just imagine little circles of black lace yarn. I'm not entirely sure. So it gave me just the right amount of coverage so that I didn't feel self-conscious about the scar on my face. Now, of course, when I walk in, I'm the only person there wearing a veil, so people were curious. I got some looks. I got some raised eyebrows. But it was a difference. They were looking at the veil. They weren't looking at my injury. Somehow, that matters.
Well, Aaron, I know you hate being the center of attention.
I hate being the center of attention, and yet I do it so well. It's a weird paradox of my life. And so, it took a while for people to warm up to me, but, I talked to them. They asked what was going on. I explained. Sometimes I would lift and show them what was going on, and they said, oh, it doesn't look so bad. And so, I had a great time, and that's kind of unusual for me. So the final thing that I've done this week is I want to plug a show called The Orville, which is essentially a Star Trek show without being Star Trek. I know it's done by Seth MacFarlane, and people hear that name, they're gonna think that it's Family Guy in space, it's nothing but dick jokes. Well, there are dick jokes, but it's a much better show than people give it credit for. And towards the end of the season, they're really, really good. They're essentially Star Trek shows with the serial numbers filed off. So give it a try, please.
I already looked at Netflix, and they don't have it on Netflix streaming, so I guess I'm going to have to wait for the DVD to come out. So speaking of Netflix, I've been literally doing nothing. It's my vacation. I am laying on the couch, and I am binge watching two different shows, Death in Paradise and Battle Creek. Now, Battle Creek is, I think it's Josh Duhamel as this FBI agent that everybody loves, except the people who know him best. They don't like him very much. And he's sort of demoted, kicked to the curb, routed off to Battle Creek, Michigan. This is apparently a big thing for Battle Creek, and it's a random police station in Battle Creek, Michigan, and it's a bunch of interesting characters. It's a lot of fun, and it only went one season. They canceled it mid-season. It was 13 episodes. I'm up to episode 12. I've watched that. I still have to watch episode 13 and finish it out. The other one that I am watching is Death in Paradise, which is a British police comedy, but it's not like slapstick comedy. It's funny, but it's funny as a result of the things that happen, not self-consciously we're going to be slapstick. It's a British police officer is sent to a random island called St. Marie, I think it is. St. Marie. It's a fictional island somewhere near Guadeloupe. It's actually filmed in Guadeloupe. He is an officer down there and he gets killed, so the Met sends another detective to go find out what happened. And he's this uptight, suit-wearing British police officer who goes down to the island of St. Mary to the Honoré police station and has to solve this crime. And then when he does, they make him stay. And all he wants to do is go home to London and be cold in the fog and drink beer in a pub someplace. And he's stuck in paradise, and it grates on him.
So it's a combination of a fish out of water story, and it sounds like it's a costume drama, because we know how much you love your British costume dramas, Sean.
No, in fact, in this case, it could have been filmed yesterday.
Oh.
They've got 6 seasons so far, and they're still filming them. So, I mean, it's a couple of years old, but it's straight up modern day police in a random island in the Caribbean. It's pretty cool. I like it. I'm thinking like, shut up, dude. You're in the Caribbean. And my wife's like, I totally understand. I'd want to go back to London where it's cold. So she mostly doesn't watch it with me, but it is kind of funny, the difference. Like, I'd totally go to random island in the Caribbean. Sounds cool. The other thing I did is I spent Sunday at the local soaring club. I didn't fly in any gliders. I just helped out on the ground, and I will be joining the local soaring club and learning how to fly a glider. So that's going to be fun. By the time you've listened to this, it's probably not going to listen to it on Christmas, unless you're going to listen to it on the way to the in-laws house. I'm going to be spending all day Christmas at the in-laws house, which is the family tradition. The wife and I go over to her mom and dad's house. I cook breakfast. My wife cooks dinner. And in the middle, we do stockings and Christmas gifts. And then we get a book or something. So we spend sort of the afternoon reading books and taking the dog for a walk or whatever. That's our Christmas. And it's a lot of fun. I like it. So Aaron, why don't you talk about our sponsors?
Thanks to Lucky Gunner and Remington for their support of GunBlog VarietyCast Radio. From Golden Saber to range rounds, get a full lineup of quality Remington ammo that ships fast at luckygunner.com.
All right, so what's Beth got for us today?
Well, like I said, it'll be Christmas Eve when this podcast drops, so in order to get into the proper spirit, Beth performs for us a reading of 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, but with a twist.
Well, it's the day before Christmas, or the night before Christmas to be specific, and I hope everyone is with their family and enjoying some fellowship and food and friendship and some fun. That's what the holidays are all about. Of course, I know a lot of us have really long wish lists for the holidays as well, and I'm sure some of those lists included some gear and guns and other fun things that celebrate our Second Amendment right to self-protection and the protection and defense of our loved ones. I don't know about you, but I think it's nice to break away from the norm now and again and maybe share something that's a bit more laid back and fun. So hopefully with Christmas tomorrow, my fellow shooters out there can enjoy this lighthearted take on an old holiday favorite, Account of a Visit from St. Nicholas. I've attempted to stay true to the style of the original poem, most often attributed to well-known scholar Clement Seymour. A few of his descriptive lines and stanzas remain intact, but the rest, well, let's just say I exercised some creative liberties. Whether you love it or you hate it, here's wishing you all a very safe, happy, merry, and wonderful Christmas from my 2A family to yours. 'Twas the night before Christmas when, all through our range, not a shooter was stirring, which is always quite strange. The targets were hung by the backstop with care, in hopes that new firearms soon would be there. The RSOs were working all secure by their sheds, while visions of AR-15s danced in their heads, and Mama with her holster and I with my gun had just collected our brass after a long day of fun, when out on the lane there arose such a clatter. I sprang from my rest to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore down safety posters, and threw up the sash. The moon on the curves of the new fallen brass gave the luster of gold to objects in mass, when what to my wondering eyes should be seen but several concealed carry guns and 8 tiny magazines. With a little old shooter so lively and quick, I knew in a moment it must be St. Nick. More rapid than autos his firearms they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Springfield, now Beretta, now HK and Nighthawk, on Kimber, on Taurus, on Sig Sauer and Glock, to the top of the berm, to the top of the wall. Now blast away, blast away, blast away all. As spent cases that before the firing gun fly, when they release a projectile, mount to the sky. So up to the shooting lane the firearms they flew, with range cart full of accessories, and St. Nicholas too. And then, in a twinkling, I heard on the lot the shooting and blasting of each little shot. As I drew in my hand and was turning around, down the range St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in camo, from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with lead particles and soot. A bundle of guns he had flung on his back, and he looked like an operator, just opening his pack. His eyes, how they twinkled, his dimples, how merry. His cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard of his chin was as white as the snow. The stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke had encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowlful of jelly. He was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, and I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work, and filled all the range bags, then turned with a jerk, and laying his finger on the side of his gun, and safely reholstering down the range he did run. He sprang to his range cart, to his guns gave a check, and away they all blasted like the stream of a jet. But I heard him exclaim ere he drove out of sight, "Happy shooting to all, and to all a good night. Until next time, y'all stay safe and be well armed."
You can read more from Beth at usconcealedcarry.com/blog and click on Pacifiers and Peacemakers in the left sidebar.
This podcast runs on your donations. Go to GunBlog VarietyCast.com and click on the Donate or Subscribe button in the right sidebar. You can make a one-time donation of any amount or subscribe for as little as $2 a month. That doesn't sound like much, but we pay our server costs monthly. A little help from you is a big help to us.
Felons Behaving Badly. Minister foils Orange Church break-in. Shoots out tire on fleeing suspect's car. Dateline, Hillsborough, North Carolina. An Orange County minister thwarted a break-in at his church on Thursday and was able to help apprehend a suspect by shooting out a tire on a fleeing car, authorities said Friday. Reverend Austin Brown, pastor of Five Forks Baptist Church at 7500 NC Highway 86 in Hillsborough,
Stop by and say hi.
was studying in the church at about 3 p.m. when someone tried to break in, authorities said. Brown said that when he saw the man in church, he pulled out his gun and fired a shot at him. He then fired several more rounds at the fleeing man's car. As Orange County deputies searched the area, Sergeant Brandon Lassiter came upon suspect a few miles away with a spare tire in hand. Authorities say suspect was forced to pull over because one of his tires was left flat by Brown's gunshots, and the suspect had attempted to hide the car at an abandoned golf course on McDade Shore Road until he could change the tire. Suspect dropped the tire and fled on foot when Lassiter confronted him, but he was apprehended about 5 p.m. following a search of the woods in the Cedar Grove community. Suspect, whose last known address was 3135 Callaway Drive in Mebane,
Not sure if you should stop by and say hi to that one.
was charged with felony breaking and entering and attempted larceny. Brown said he moved back to the Triangle about a year ago from Alabama. He has carried a handgun for years. He has a concealed handgun carry license in Alabama and took the class for the North Carolina permit a few months ago, he said. And he said he wasn't armed as a result of the recent church shootings.
Wait, he said he wasn't armed?
No, he wasn't armed just because, as a result of, he was armed normally. It's poorly worded. What he wanted to say was, oh, no, of course, I always carry a gun. But the question was, are you carrying a gun now because of the church shootings? No, of course not. I always carry a gun. And he wasn't armed as a result of the recent church shootings. Yeah, see, not very good writing.
No.
Layers and layers of editorial stupidity.
This pastor, I'm glad he didn't get in trouble because, you really shouldn't shoot after fleeing burglary suspects. Yeah. On the other hand, he did a good job with his shot placement. So tell us about the suspect, Sean.
The suspect. 2 counts, possess Schedule 6, misdemeanor, Class 3. Receiving pass substitute money. Not entirely certain what that is. Probably counterfeit. Misdemeanor, Class 3. You'd think it would be higher than a Class 3 misdemeanor to pass substitute money, but whatever. Carry a concealed weapon, misdemeanor, Class 2. 2 counts, driver's license revoked, misdemeanor, Class 1. Possess Schedule 6, misdemeanor, Class 1. Assault on a female, misdemeanor, Class A1. Maintain any place, controlled substance, felon, Class I. Possess with intent to sell, Schedule 6, felon, Class I. Common law robbery, felon, Class G. And 3 counts, robbery with a dangerous weapon, felon, Class D.
Sean, considering all of these things in his record, it's rather surprising he didn't burst into flame when he stepped onto church property.
You thought they just want to steal your data. Now there's malware that turns your computer into a Bitcoin miner for someone else. Barron tells you how to avoid having someone steal your computer processing power in Tech Tips, Tech Tips, Tech Tips.
You are damaging my calm.
Tech Tips with the Barron.
Hey, kiddos. So, I'm back this week, and I'm actually going to talk about something I talked about previously. A while ago, Forbes was issuing ads that caused malware, more specifically crypto malware, on people's computers. So by visiting Forbes.com, you would end up being served an advertisement, and the end result was your hard drive would get encrypted, and you'd have to pay Bitcoin in order to get the data back. This has shifted to a completely new direction. Where previously they were extorting money out of you, now they're stealing your hardware resources to make you mine money for them. So JavaScript, the wonderful tool that I can rant for hours about, that gets abused for everything in the world, has been now leveraged so that it can do crypto mining. So it will actually start mining for Bitcoin. This is an extremely CPU intensive process, and they hijack part of the browser session and run off and start mining crypto. The good news is there's actually already a couple plugins for Chrome and Firefox to block this. Additionally, if you use uBlock Origin, AdBlock Plus, and Ghostery, which I've all recommended previously, things will largely not really be noticeable to you. If you're not running those things, if you're browsing the web and all of a sudden you see your computer using 100% CPU usage, if you start getting sluggish and slowish response, kill the web browser, go through your task manager, make sure there's no other instances of the web browser running. It ends up they've actually discovered some exploits and vulnerabilities so that they can actually spawn child processes so that closing the web browser doesn't actually get rid of it. Make sure everything gets closed. And then restart your web browser, and then go install those plugins. Seriously, go install them. If you're not running said plugins, or more specifically, you should always be running those plugins, but if you have, say, a decent firewall such as pfSense, which I've talked about recently, there's a plugin for pfSense called pfBlocker, and it allows you to do DNS and IP blacklisting. Attached in the show notes is a wonderful how-to on installing it if you're running pfSense, and basically block everything. When it comes to countries, the only countries that you really need to worry about supporting are the US, Canada, maybe Mexico, and Europe. When it comes to Russia, Ukraine, China, any of the major Asian areas, unless you're directly doing business with them, deny them access coming in and even deny access going out. Because what will happen is when you get one of these nasty pieces of malware embedded in a web page, your web browser will try and load it, and it's going to go out to that website and try and fetch it. PF Blocker and other things since it's an outbound connection coming from your computer, won't realize that this is actually bad. So if you say block it in both directions, both inbound and outbound, you're going to be golden, and it's just going to basically end up in a black hole and you'll never see it again. So remember, run your ad blockers, execute safe browsing. Otherwise, have a fun time. It is the internet. Talk to you guys next week.
Barron still blogs at the-minuteman.org.
When you find yourself in a hole, you should stop digging. Miguel is here to talk about how to get your mind off your problems and find inner peace.
Hello, Hiddens, and welcome to a holiday edition of the Mental Flea Market. If I sound strange, it's because for the last 2 weeks I've been battling the flu in full splendor. Actually hit my whole family. We've been in bed. I am not fond of this time of the year. It's a family tradition that something happens and simply we just don't find the cheer. Okay? My wife loves it and she's got the house decorated, whatever. I'm not a humbug, but close enough. Besides that, we got all the idiots doing the shopping and driving like and then they get pissed off when you run them off the road and set their vehicles on fire, and whatever. I hate that crap, and I hate the fact, that I have a hard time maintaining what little left of my sanity is during this time of year. Now, speaking of sanity, what do you do to rest? What do you do, more specifically, to give your mind a rest? You have a hobby, you have a distraction, something that throws your wire to the ground, so to speak, and you discharge whatever troubles your mind. It's not spoken often, but not being able to relax is harmful to the mind and to your overall readiness. It is silly, but I know you have experienced a sense of blah, the one that I'm sounding like right now. Also, that I can't take any more of this crap feeling. And even the fully official, I don't give a f no more. Even though your body might be totally rest, in perfect physical shape and ready to perform. It's the mind, brother. It's the mind. To properly relax, and since I don't consume liquids or other chemicals, I'm partial to anything that uses my hands and has a routine. As a shooter, reloading, I find reloading extremely relaxing. I reload single stage, press, and, step, doing by step, by step, by step. It requires concentration, requires precision. I can do maybe 100 rounds, and I just suck an hour out of the schedule, and it's totally relaxing. Fishing, for example, is great, unless you're using it, as an excuse to drink and drown your problems. The whole exercise of trying to guess where the fish are, what kind of bait will they respond to, the casting, the retrieving, the repeat till you hit something, it's an amazing healer to the mind. Even if you cause the general direction of the freaking fishes for not taking a bite. But all of a sudden, you might have spent 3 or 4 hours not thinking about your problems or issues at work or at home. Your mind is, suddenly refreshed. It is amazing. It's not as boring as, other people make it think. Believe it or not, I used to think the same thing. Another thing maybe is the honey-do list. All those little things you have to do around the house. That can be your escape hatch. From fixing a leaky faucet, squeaky floorboard, a door that's getting stuck, oiling something that is, making noise. That kind of simple manual labors are restful because you need to concentrate on what you're doing. Especially when you suck at something like plumbing and require multiple trips to the big box hardware store. Don't ask me how, I don't. Maybe, it's family and friend time with board games. Card games, Monopoly, Ladders and Shoots, Uno, that kind of stuff. They are great unless you have this desperate competitive soul that requires to win no matter what. And in that case, stay the hell away from that kind of game. If you are the individual that played Twister under MMA rules, trust me, you need to seek alternative ways to relax. Another thing, again, using your hands, concentration. Building model cars or airplanes or boats, there are literally thousands of kits designed for the very new to the most advanced. Hell, you can build from cars to starships out of Legos. That is as manual as you think you can, do. There are kits for that. I even saw just not long ago on somewhere on the internet somebody who was building a Death Star from Star Wars out of Legos. You cannot deal with small parts? Well, Legos doesn't get any better than that. At the end is the manual work with the narrow beam concentration that we're looking for. In case you still have not figured out, I doubt you're not that dumb, we need to develop the ability to separate ourselves from whatever is causing us trouble or sorrow. You need to get out of that hole you're digging and see the light of distraction for a while. Very possibly when you return to the hole, you will notice that it's no longer as deep as you originally thought, and not as challenging as you originally felt. And that is my very, very small Christmas gift in this installment. May you enjoy the holidays with your family, or if alone, hell, enjoy it anyway. See you next show.
Get more Miguel daily at gunfreezone.net.
Hi, this is Gail, the Predator, from the Pro Arms Podcast, reminding you that this podcast is a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network. Check out the other podcasts at selfdefenseradio.net.
Those who want tighter controls on firearms are always telling us that gun owners agree with them. So when Dave Workman and Alan Gottlieb wrote a widely published article seeking common ground, you would think that would start an instant dialogue with gun safety advocates. Our special guest today is Dave Workman, here to tell us about a whole lot of nothing they heard from the other side. Dave Workman is an award-winning career journalist with an expertise in firearms and the outdoors. He is the author of several books dealing with firearms politics and the senior editor at thegunmag.com. He has a degree in editorial journalism from the University of Washington and is a lifelong Washington resident. Welcome to the show, Dave.
Thanks for having me.
Dave, we're forever told by the anti-gun lobby that even 75%, 80, 90% of NRA members agree with their anti-gun agenda. That sounds like they believe there's a lot of common ground between gun owners like us and anti-gunners like them. You and Alan Gottlieb wrote a widely published article seeking common ground. What'd you find out?
Well, we didn't find out anything because so far the other side has been absolutely mum. We haven't gotten a response from the gun control crowd or not. We put the question out there, can we find common ground on gun rights, not gun control? I mean, their sales pitch is a non-starter from the get-go. They want to talk about gun control. We want to talk about gun rights, and that's really what we're talking about here is restrictions on gun rights. They haven't accomplished anything. Let's try another tack. Let's deal with this issue from the position that, yes, we do have gun rights. It's an individual right that is protected by the Second Amendment, and go from there. The other side just doesn't want to talk about it, I guess.
So why do you think they've remained silent?
Well, they have really nothing to say. They don't bring anything to the table except requests for more erosion of the Second Amendment and state constitutional rights for keeping and bearing arms. Instead of expanding gun rights, like, for example, national concealed carry reciprocity, they're dead set against that. They believe in restricting firearms rights any way and every way that they can.
Let's take a look at some of these common grounds that we should have with anybody who respects civil rights at all. The first one you wrote was, can we agree that the Second Amendment should be treated with the same respect as other amendments in the Bill of Rights?
The reason that part of the column, I think, hit a dead end with the gun control crowd is that they've always treated the Second Amendment as a second-class right or a strongly regulated government privilege. This is a civil right we're talking about. It's not a privilege at all. It's a right. It's protected by the Constitution. So we've got to maintain that integrity if we're going to be talking about this at all. They don't want to do that. We insist on it. I make my living with the First Amendment, and there's a lot of history with the First Amendment: the right, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly. They're held very dear by the majority of American citizens, whether you're liberal or conservative. The Second Amendment is the same way. You've got to respect that as a full-fledged civil right.
The second one you wrote was, an oft-repeated demand from the gun control lobby is that we should license gun owners and register their guns, the same as we would do with automobiles.
Yeah, there's a downside to this that we pointed out in Alan Gottlieb and I in our op-ed piece, that if they want licensing, which they've insisted on for years, which they've strongly advocated for this. Well, those licenses, same as cars, are respected and honored in all 50 states. You can even drive across the border into Canada or Mexico on your driver's license. So what we're suggesting is that, hey, if you're going to do that with a driver's license, and driving is a privilege in this country, you're going to have to do that with concealed carry licenses because firearms ownership is protected. It's a right in this country and is protected by the Constitution. It's not a privilege at all. And again, this is a subject, an area that they don't want to discuss.
Now, this one's near and dear to my heart. Can we agree that gun safety needs to be part of the public school curriculum? Now, we often hear, oh, we're all about gun safety, gun safety, gun safety. But the minute somebody says, hey, well, maybe we should have gun safety in the schools, teach children not to do stupid things with firearms, that would make it safer in the world, they don't want to hear it. Why do you think that is?
I think it's because they're disingenuous, if not downright dishonest, about their intentions. Their definition of gun safety is trying to scare the public into not having firearms. We see this time and again. I was a firearms instructor for 35 years. I taught an adult course on firearms safety and self-defense at a community college south of Seattle for about 2 years. From that, I wrote a book on Washington state gun rights and responsibilities, simply to answer the questions that kept coming up in that class. The idea that these groups are quote-unquote, gun safety groups is ridiculous. They're gun control groups. No matter how they package it, it's still gun control. And a few years ago, I started calling them by what they really are, gun prohibition organizations. They want to ban certain types of guns. They want to ban handguns in certain areas. That's a prohibition. That's not control at all. That is just outright prohibition. Posing that question to them, again, we get nothing but silence from the other side. They don't want kids to learn about firearms safety because they don't want kids handling guns at all. I think the idea is that within a couple of generations, they're going to put firearms into such a position that ownership and even handling a firearm is really foreign to the average citizen, and it really shouldn't be.
It's always struck me that the same people who argue against abstinence-only sex education are arguing for abstinence-only firearms education.
Well, yeah, that's there you go, and it's the same kind of silly logic. If you're going to talk about safety, let's teach safety. If you're going to talk about something else, at least be honest about it.
And the last one you put was, can both sides agree that if a photo ID should not be required to vote, then it should also not be required to exercise the rights protected by the Second Amendment?
Well, of course. Here again, you're treating the Second Amendment as a second-class right, and you're treating the exercise of that right as the prelude to a potential criminal act. We need to know who's got these guns. We need to know who you are and that you're buying these guns. Well, if they say that you shouldn't be required to provide photo ID in order to vote, which is one of the greatest responsibilities of citizenship in this country, you shouldn't have to provide a photo ID to exercise the right to keep and bear arms. It just makes sense, and that in itself is common sense. They're always talking about common sense. It's only common sense the way they see it. That's not really how life works. They look at life through rose-colored glasses, I think. When we hit them with that question, and we talked about that before we wrote the op-ed, I think that it's a very provocative question, and it's supposed to make people think. And I think that really is what's going on. People look at that and they say, "No, wait a minute, maybe they got a point there."
Instead of honestly debating and seeking common ground, people like Nancy Pelosi pretend that treating a concealed handgun license like a driver's license is equivalent to, quote, inviting violent criminals to carry concealed weapons. That doesn't sound like the voice of somebody who wants an honest discussion.
No, that sounds like the voice of somebody who ought to go home and write her memoirs. I think that Nancy Pelosi is good with rhetoric. She's really bad with common sense. She doesn't think these things through at all. That's like we have to pass it to find out what's in it. She's been guilty of this sort of illogical rhetoric before. The National Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act, the proposal, would simply require that each state honor the concealed pistol licenses or concealed carry permits from all other states. Bad guys are already crossing the borders of states with guns to commit crimes. Anybody who doesn't understand that is brain dead. We're simply suggesting with this legislation that the good guys ought to be on a level playing field. If I want to, say, travel from Washington State to Oregon to California to Arizona on my way down to New Mexico or Texas, for example, and I want to take a firearm with me for my personal safety, I ought to be able to do that without having to worry about being arrested for violating some state's laws. If I'm licensed to carry concealed by the state of Washington, that ought to be good enough for anybody, anywhere, that this guy Workman is a good guy. The criminals, they don't bother with concealed carry licenses at all. When they show up to rob a gas station or a drugstore, believe me, they're not packing a gun legally. They're probably recidivist criminals who stole the gun or acquired it through some other means. So put the law-abiding citizen on a level playing field. That's all that I think the gun community is suggesting here.
Well, to steal something from Weird, I think it just all strikes me as a bad faith argument.
The arguments that I have gotten over the years from gun control people have been pretty bad faith. They want to meet at a certain point. They want to compromise, and if you compromise, then they move the line. And that's not compromise at all. That's just take whatever you can get and then take some more. I was once in a conversation with a guy who has since passed away, and we were talking about finding some kind of an agreement on, I think it was a safe storage bill that was up for grabs in Washington State at the time. So I asked him in the middle of the conversation, I said, well, wait a minute, what do the gun owners get out of this if they agree to do this and this and this? And he sat there for a minute, and then he finally said, well, peace of mind. And I said, hey, that's not going to go very far with gun owners at all. They already have peace of mind. They own firearms. They're safe in their own homes. They can legally carry the firearms. You got to give them something else. You got to give them something tangible. Concealed carry reciprocity is good. Maybe legalizing silencers in the state of Washington. That was good, and actually that did happen. In order to compromise on something, to negotiate something, you've got to be able to offer something. And when you just offer peace of mind, that's pretty nebulous and it really doesn't mean anything. It doesn't amount to anything.
All right, Dave, it was good to talk with you. I'll see you again soon.
My pleasure. You take care.
You can read more from Dave at Liberty Park Press, thegunmag.com, Conservative Firing Line, and American Handgunner Insider online.
In episode 171, Tiffany chatted with firearms trainer Aqil Qadir about using affinity groups to help connect separate firearms cultures. This week, she talks to Aqil about his law enforcement background and how we might begin to mend the frayed relationship between many black communities and police.
You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view. Till you climb inside of his skin, walk around in it.
Hey everybody, so this is Tiffany and I'm back again with Mr. Aqil Qadir. Ak, how you doing?
Well, thank you.
Excellent. So I have the absolute privilege of having Aqil here for a second week to continue our conversation about Black gun culture and really veering into a separate topic that we touched on last week, which is community policing and the very complicated and sometimes difficult relationship between the Black community and law enforcement. I think that you, Aqil, are uniquely qualified to speak on this topic because you are Black and you are a former law enforcement officer. So can you tell us a little bit about your background in law enforcement?
Thank you for having me. I started out in the Buffalo, New York Police Department in 1992, 7 years patrol, 7 years as a detective. When I was on patrol, I worked the east side of Buffalo, which was where I grew up, which is typically where most of the African-American population in Buffalo lives. Buffalo is always ranked as one of the most racially segregated cities in America. So, I worked the area that I grew up with, which was at the time going through the crack epidemic. So got a lot of work. Did that and then got out, and since then have been doing training for the federal government and for law enforcement agencies.
Tell us about some of the cultural dynamics of the police agency where you worked, not just in terms of race, but any of the cultural elements that maybe presented difficulties or challenges that some police are better equipped to navigate than others, and maybe give us some insight as to why that might be.
When you take things out of their historical context, then that's where a lot of the misunderstandings of how things should be and getting a deeper understanding of why things are the way they are. For example, Buffalo, New York, at the time that I was hired, was under court order to hire minorities. It had been found guilty in federal court of deliberately not hiring minorities. And that was the culture that I came in. I worked in Precinct 12 at the time, east side of Buffalo, and it was known to be a house where only really African Americans and people who couldn't work anywhere else, or people who wanted to make a lot of money, getting a lot of arrests. Over the years working there, I came to the conclusion that after talking to some of my coworkers who lived in the suburbs, grew up in the suburbs, that people from certain communities should be selected first, if possible, to police those communities because they have an understanding of the culture in that particular community.
Why is it, do you think, that a police officer who's from a, upper middle class or affluent white suburban neighborhood will face challenges policing an inner city, majority black, poor area of town?
Because he doesn't know the culture. Now, that doesn't make him a bad person. And if he's willing to learn the culture and understand it, which some of them were, and they made great cops. Others weren't. Others looked down on the people. Others had a certain perception of the people that they were dealing with. Others were afraid, which I thought was actually interesting. There were guys that I worked with who would be in that area at night, loaded to bear with guns and, in their official capacity, but wouldn't dare drive through that same area off duty. Wouldn't even think about it. And that speaks. I policed the community and I lived in it. Meaning, whatever I did in that community, I was affected by it, as opposed to, there were guys who would do things that were a little shaky and then get up and go to their suburban homes, and they didn't have to deal with the effect of whatever they were even doing in that community. And like I said, if a person is willing to learn the culture and understand the people, and be fair, because that's all people want is, are you fair? Do you treat them fairly? But if people are willing to learn the culture, then they make great cops, great law enforcement officers. You and I know as people who grew up in the hood that there's most of the people in the hood are wonderful people. And there's just a few bad apples that spoil the whole thing. And it's the same thing.
Kind of like the police department.
It's the same thing with law enforcement. All it takes is 2 bad apples to make for a really bad experience. All it takes is to have 2 bad cops out there, patrolling at night in an area that will actually get other cops hurt, unfortunately, because you can only push people so far. And it's a job. It's not something that you were born to do. It's not something that you're entitled to do. If you can't work a certain area, either work someplace else where you are culturally sensitive or go get another job.
I'm sure there are plenty of folks who hear us talking about this and may see it as a bit esoteric and theoretical, and maybe even folks making excuses for the high arrest rate or for the sometimes heavy-handed policing that happens in high crime areas, in inner cities, in poor areas. And they may think, a crime is a crime. Either someone's committed a crime or they haven't. So there shouldn't be any difference between how you police the burbs and how you police the hood. Can you speak to that, or do you have a specific example of an instance where someone who's not familiar with the neighborhood misinterpreted a situation, or where that unfamiliarity maybe hurt his ability to police effectively?
Yes, if you see a crime, then of course your job will be to stop that crime and apprehend that criminal. But policing is a lot more than that. Policing is your relationship with the people that you're supposedly protecting. And they have to trust you. Because a lot of times it's not what you do, but how you do it. Let me give you an example of something that I would do. There would be times when if I had to shake a man's hand, for example, on a call or whatever, I would offer to shake his hand and I would take my glove off to shake his hand. And you would not believe how many times people would respond positively to that. Now, I may go to the cruiser and open up the back and put some hand sanitizer on when I got in the car, To make that connection right then and there, I would do that type of thing. And there were guys who would actually say, man, you shook my hand. You took your glove off to shake my hand. If I had to arrest a guy, if I could, tactically speaking, and it was sound, away from his children, where his children didn't see that, I would do it that way. And there were guys who I would work with who didn't seem to care. There's a way that you can do the job, be tactically sound, and go home every night, safely. And at the same time, give people a chance, speak to them like they're human beings. People don't remember what you did. They don't remember what you said, but they definitely remember how you made them feel. And I would speak to them like that, like they were adults, not like they were stupid.
What about the argument that, look, this is a criminal. He's a drug dealer. Why are you affording him so much respect, which he doesn't deserve? Why are you wasting time?
He's a human being. And even though he may do something bad, we will deal with his actions. We profile actions, not people. So we will deal with his actions. And he goes to prison. And that's what America has decided that we do with our criminals. We send them to prison. One thing that would bother me is when I would get these guys who would come in and they would look at the whole place like everybody's a drug dealer and every guy's a drug dealer, everyone is a prostitute. Now, some of them after a while would realize that wasn't the case, but some of them sometimes when they would first come in, that would be how they would approach the whole thing. And you would see that in their treatment of people often.
The issue comes up often about police and fear. In the self-defense community, we always talk about reasonable fear and how fear of imminent fatal harm can justify lethal force in defense of one's life. If that same concept applies to police officers in the course of their duties, what's the problem with police officers saying, hey, furtive movement, I didn't know what he had. I'm in the hood. Everybody here's got guns. I was afraid for my life, so I did what I had to do. What's wrong with that argument?
Well, you have to take it on a case-by-case basis. Sometimes what I saw was very valid. Some of the things that I see that go on, yes, police officers definitely have to use deadly force to protect themselves and the lives of the innocent. And hopefully they always do so judiciously. But sometimes what I see is cultural predispositions making them jump the gun. Being a police officer, and we're talking about in our classes, the awesome power of carrying a firearm. Now add to that the awesome power in having the state behind you, and the presumption that whatever you're doing and however you had to treat that person deserved it. Sometimes that's the case. Sometimes that's not.
You mentioned that oftentimes police officers who end up involved in lethal shootings get the benefit of the doubt. They enjoy that luxury from, I guess, mainstream audiences. But meanwhile, in the Black community, police officers are very often maligned. Almost any fatal shooting by a police officer against a Black suspect is viewed with skepticism and criticized in the Black community. What's your advice to Black folks who are eager to doubt any actions taken by a police officer that lead to the death of a suspect when that suspect is Black?
What I would say to Black people is try not to be emotional and actually look at the facts of the case, because sometimes there are bad people that need to be shot by police officers. Look at all the facts before you go, okay, it's automatically was a bad shoot because it's a white officer shooting, a Black suspect. That's not always the case. Make sure that we look at them on a case-by-case basis and understand the law behind and understand the circumstances that the police officer has to deal with, every day. And, once you explain to people, for example, what the police officer deals with, then sometimes they understand and they take that into consideration. They don't know what they don't know. So educate yourselves on that. Try to look at it from the police officer standpoint. And what would you do if you were in that circumstance? But don't just blanket, look at every circumstance that happens where there's a white police officer, using deadly force on the Black suspect and automatically assume that he's a secret member of the KKK out executing people.
What a perfect note to end on. Well, I appreciate your time, Aqil. Thank you so much. And one more time, for anyone who wants to find out more about your training company, where can they go?
Citizensafety.com.
Excellent. Have a great day. Thanks again for the interview, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for your time, Tiffany. You have a great day.
You can follow Tiffany at frontsightpress.com.
Cerakote is a polymer ceramic composite coating that can be applied to metals, plastics, polymers, and wood. It's also what will take your plain Jane firearm from basic to full custom. Whether you want a handgun coated in just a single color, your hunting rifle camouflaged for your specific environment, or your competition pistol sprayed in purple, white, and black Carolina Cryptic, you want Carolina ceramic coating to do the job. Bud and his team of skilled technicians will carefully disassemble and clean your firearm, professionally apply the Cerakote in your choice of colors and patterns, and return your firearm to you in perfect working order. And they also do auto engine parts. When I wanted my competition handgun Cerakoted, I trusted Carolina Ceramic Coating, and you should too. Check out their work on Instagram. Search at CerakoteNC, that's at CERAKOTENC, or go to CarolinaCeramicCoating.com. And now it's time for Blue Collar Prepping with that bratty kid sister of the gun blogosphere, Erin Paulette.
Come on, every pony! It's time for Blue Collar Prepping with Erin Paulette!
Since Beth has entertained us with a gunny version of 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, I thought I would tell the story of the Nativity from a prepper perspective. In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world, and everyone went to their place of birth to register. So Joseph, who was not yet a prepper, packed up his belongings and placed his pregnant wife Mary upon their donkey, and traveled from his home in Nazareth in the province of Galilee to the town of Bethlehem in Judea. It is unclear whether Mary was a native of Nazareth and registered there before traveling to Bethlehem with her husband, or if wives had to register with their husbands, but the fact remains that the government required Joseph to register in person rather than by mail because bureaucracy. And this was the first example of registration leads to confiscation, as we shall later see. We don't know much about Joseph, but we know that he wasn't very good at planning, and was probably estranged from his family, because in the time it took him to reach Bethlehem, some sources say it would take 4 days, some 8, some 10, so let's just assume the average and say it took them a week to get there. Not only were there no places for a man and his heavily pregnant wife to stay, but he also didn't have any family whom he could ask for hospitality. Instead, he had to beg for shelter and was allowed to sleep in the stable of an inn only because the innkeeper took pity on his pregnant wife. From this, we learn the dual values of bug out as soon as possible to avoid the rush, and cultivate a prepper tribe so that you will have a place to stay after you bug out. And lo, Joseph didst register, a process so boring that it's not even mentioned in the scripture. I expect it was like the DMV, only without electricity. And Mary did give birth to her son Jesus, the Emmanuel, and God did blow their OPSEC by making a big presentation with choirs of angels singing to shepherds who then went into town to look for a baby. And believe you me, a bunch of shepherds and their flocks milling about a stable in a crowded city is going to attract attention. And that's even before the little drummer boy started making noise parumpa-pum-pum. Fortunately, nothing bad came of this, probably because, well, God, but it just goes to show that even a well-meaning relative can let slip the details of your bug-out location to strangers, but more on that later. And because Mary and Joseph were devout Jews, they took Jesus to Jerusalem to present him at the temple to be circumcised. As a point of interest, Bethlehem is only 6 miles from Jerusalem, so they probably used their get-home bags rather than their bug-out bags to make the trip. And then they returned to Bethlehem for reasons which are unclear, but probably involved more paperwork for registration because Joseph needed to add a dependent to his W-4. And then the Magi, 3 wise men from the east, showed up at their home bearing gifts of money, aromatic resin used in incense and perfumes, and a bitter medicinal resin used as an antiseptic and analgesic, which Joseph added to their bug-out bags. These funds and medicine were good to have, because when God blew Mary and Joseph's OPSEC, the Magi saw the star and followed it, passing through Jerusalem and telling everyone in King Herod's court that they were going to see a newborn king who was going to overthrow Herod. Like all governments, King Herod didn't want to give up any power, so he declared that all boys under the age of 2 were to be killed. And lo, registration led to confiscation and destruction. Fortunately for the Holy Family, God realized that he had blown their OPSEC and gave them a warning that their current bug-out location wasn't secure. By this point, Joseph had become a good prepper, because at the first sign of danger he assembled their bug-out bags, put Mary and Joseph on the donkey, and got the heck out of Dodge. The gold and the incense, a luxury item, were likely used to buy supplies and facilitate passage to Egypt, and the myrrh was used in their medical kits when they became sick or sore. And thus, the Holy Family did bug out to Egypt, outside of Herod's jurisdiction, a distance of at least 40 miles to the border, and they stayed there until Herod died and it was safe to return. From this we learn the value of outliving our enemies and keeping track of foreign affairs. Merry Christmas, everyone!
This week, Weird takes on part 2 of the Jordan Klepper interview on Kick-Ass Politics, where he plugs his Comedy Central special, Jordan Klepper Solves Guns, in This Week in Anti-Gun Nuttery.
Okay, here's part 2 of the Jordan Klepper interview on the Kick-Ass Politics podcast, where he plugs his Comedy Central special, Jordan Klepper Solves Guns. If you listened to last week's show, Klepper shared some of his nutty opinions on guns and gun control. That wasn't the end of it.
I think most of America, we're moderates on guns. We believe the same things.
Well, he's right, except that most moderates on guns aren't really concerned about them or the Second Amendment. They either don't own guns, which is a perfectly reasonable choice, or own a few guns and live in one of the many states that doesn't hassle gun owners, which is almost all of them. They don't see guns as a big issue, so they don't care what either side does. Nor do they know much about guns, existing gun laws, proposed gun laws, let alone the actual numerical results of those laws. I don't want somebody neutral on heart surgery performing a triple bypass on me.
Most people on the left are not out to take away people's guns, are not anti the Second Amendment.
He's right, you know. Over the last few years, there's been a huge influx of new shooters. These new shooters have been coming from urban and suburban areas. There are lots of new shooters from minority communities, and I think we're seeing some inroads being cut into the LGBT community. These are not traditionally conservative groups. And while they're coming over to the gun side, they aren't abandoning all their views just because they now own a gun. We need to remember this, especially if you are the more traditional conservative libertarian gun owner. Just because somebody identifies as a Democrat or a progressive doesn't mean that they are anti-gun.
They're anti a bunch of people dying from guns, which people on the right are also anti a bunch of people dying from guns. Mm-hmm. But we're talking about flags and eagles, and suddenly you're not talking about how to save people's lives.
Yes, we're both concerned about people dying from guns. Both sides of the issue claim to be for reducing deaths. Except one side is constantly pushing laws that at best do nothing to violent crime, and at worst, cause it to go up. Further, that side is always conflating gun death and gun crime with violent crime, implying that if that number was to drop, the public would be safer. And meanwhile, the other side pushes laws that the anti-gunners claim would increase danger and violence. And when they pass, violent crime goes down. I understand that there's more than one way to skin a cat, but some of those ways are wrong, and the anti-gun agenda is wrong.
Is part of the problem that some gun owners hear that government wants to, say, do background checks or have some form of gun control or regulation, and somehow their reptilian brain immediately hears that as the government's coming to take away my gun?
Gee, why would we think this?
Gun regulations means I'm going to lose my gun. Hillary Clinton is going to come for my gun. Like this was what was talked about during the election.
And why were we talking about this?
Certainly the Australian example is worth looking at.
We know that other countries, in response to one mass shooting, have been able to craft laws that almost eliminate mass shootings. Friends of ours, allies of ours, Great Britain, Australia.
The Supreme Court is wrong on the Second Amendment.
Gee, Hillary Clinton gave praise to a country that confiscated guns on a large scale and imposed onerous regulations on the lawful gun owners. She was open about wanting to overturn the Heller and McDonald decision in the Supreme Court. And she was actively speaking on the campaign trail about reinstating the assault weapons ban that her husband signed into law. There's nothing lizard brain about it. If you thought that Hillary Clinton was coming for your guns, it just meant you were paying attention.
I'm guessing not a lot of people had guns taken away from them during the Obama administrations. In fact, a lot of gun legislation got looser.
Okay, here's a bait and switch. This is implying that because gun control was rolled back during the Obama years, that President Obama was pro-gun. Guns weren't taken away and laws weren't passed because Second Amendment activists fought against it tooth and nail. Of course, President Obama did sign an executive order making all Social Security recipients with a designated payee prohibited people by very crassly declaring them severely mentally ill. Technically, the ATF entry teams could have kicked down those doors and arrested them for being mentally ill and possessing a gun, and confiscated all those illegally held firearms. Just like Mara Healy could technically drag my ass to jail and confiscate all my guns for possessing a Massachusetts-compliant rifle that she arbitrarily declared illegal. Just because they didn't do it doesn't mean they aren't planning to and aren't eager to do so.
But gun sales also went up during the Obama
Exactly.
administration. How do you figure that?
People get afraid that,
Yeah.
I mean, again, and you look at who's paying for what lobbying group, and guess what? Gun manufacturers make a lot of money based on fear.
This doesn't even make any sense. If the gun maker's business model was fear, wouldn't they be pro-gun control? Also, the climate of fear doesn't make good business sense, as now there's an openly pro-gun president in the White House, and pro-gun bills are being voted on in the House and Senate, and gun sales are starting to lull. As I've said before, the fear was real, and people who bought a surplus of AR-15s in 1993 made huge returns during the federal ban. And people who wanted an unrestricted firearm wished they had bought one before all the talk of bans started. People were just being smart, buying guns during the Obama years and leading up to the 2017 election. Next, the host asked Klepper why he thinks the pro-gun side is winning.
They have a lot of money, and I think that money can affect local elections in ways that have statewide ramifications.
Money only goes so far in politics. It helps, but you can't simply buy an election no matter how much you have. This is proven in the area of gun politics, as Michael Bloomberg has been outspending the pro-gun lobby groups, and he's been losing.
They're incredibly effective because of the way in which they influence local elections. I think the left doesn't have as effective ground game or think as much about those local elections, but they really do make a difference.
Now here's the truth. He doesn't outright say it, but the difference is grassroots. Say what you will about the NRA, but they have members, dues-paying, voting members. There's no analog to this to the anti-gun side. The anti-gun corporate lobby has mailing lists and donation forms and ways to volunteer, but there is no way to influence them from the ground up. The antis talk a lot of the Cincinnati Revolt, when the Second Amendment activists within the NRA tossed out the board members only concerned with sports shooting. But that can never happen with any of the anti-gun corporate lobbies. Everything Everytown does is dictated by Michael Bloomberg. Everything Moms Demand Action does is dictated by Michael Bloomberg. There are no grassroots gun control movements, and because of that, they are in a lot of trouble.
You want other people who have guns to be responsible with those. One, for safety, also so they don't sully the idea of people having guns are dangerous. Like, that is something we can all get behind.
Yes, we want people to be safe with guns. And guess what? We have been wildly successful. Accidental death by gun is down to statistical noise levels. This was not done by the gun violence prevention movement. This was done by the pro-gun people teaching safety.
When a gun is used in a crime, should we be able to figure out where that gun was used? Should we be able to do that as quickly as we can?
He ends on a big lie. Here he's talking about the ATF and how to prevent an illegal registry. It's against the law for them to turn the 4473 records into a searchable database. Jordan implies that A, somehow the current system isn't working, and B, that a registry would be a good thing. Except that the ATF doesn't seem to have much trouble when it comes to tracing a firearm's history. Just look at the recent mass shootings. We knew pretty quickly where the killers got their guns. Which leads to B. Yep, we figured out what store the killer got his gun from. So what? Several states have registries within them. My state of Massachusetts is one of them. And guess what? None of these registries are used by law enforcement to solve crimes. See, this, and anything else posed as common sense, is little more than a bad faith argument.
In addition to appearing here, Weird is a regular host on The Squirrel Report and blogs at weirdworld.com. That's WEERD world.com.
Plug of the week, Survival Blanket 2.0.
You're treading on my toes here, Sean. I normally do the survival stuff.
Well, it's actually my wife's idea.
Well, okay then. I'll allow it.
So, this is something my wife picked up at Walmart, I'm pretty sure. It's also available on Amazon. There's a link to both of them. It's a 5 foot by 7 foot, basically, survival blanket that's a survival blanket on one side and a giant orange panel on the other. So in addition to keeping you warm, you could signal passing aircraft with it. Now, Aaron, you have a survival blanket or 6, don't you?
Yeah, I sure do. I mean, I've got the space blankets. I think everyone has them, and they're these cheap little Mylar things. But I'm looking at the Amazon entry, and this is actually much nicer construction. It looks like it's more of a tarp, really. It's got grommets on the corners. You can string it up and make a shelter. They mentioned 3-ply construction. This looks quality.
Yeah, it is. And for I think it's about $12 at Walmart. You get something that you can use multiple times, because we know you pull out one of those little Mylar space blankets. Number one, they're kind of small. And number two, they're totally not reusable. So don't try.
Oh no. I mean, not only do they tear easily, but there is just no way you were folding that sucker back into the shape it came from. It like doubles or triples in volume when you try and pack it back down again.
Yeah. The reason that we're plugging this is because the wife picked one up and she ended up at the South Carolina State Fair. So she's there with a friend, helping out with their mule, and while she's down there, she has to park her car in the middle of a giant parking lot that is no shade whatsoever. So she takes this blanket, she wraps it around inside out with the shiny side out on a cooler, and of course all the beer and the ice in the cooler is still there when she comes back after all day in the bright sunlight.
Nice.
The next day, she took it and she put it over her car so that it covered the side windows and the back window. She has a little car. And she put one of those little solar reflector things, windshield protectors in the front. She said it was like she parked the car in the garage. It was nice when she got back to the car. So
nice.
So check it out. There's links in the show notes both to Amazon and to Walmart. Walmart price for me looks a little bit cheaper than the Amazon price, but take a look on both and see which one's cheaper. Well, that's our show for the week. Remember that GunBlog VarietyCast Radio is a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network.
Find the show notes at gunblogvarietycast.com/episode 175.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the GunBlog VarietyCast. Music courtesy of Rob Allen at blog.roballen.com. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and Google Play Music. This podcast is made possible by the Firearms Policy Coalition and by contributions from listeners like you. This is a URS production.